She thought she could betray me and get away with it, until I turned her perfect little world into ashes. Not only did I expose her, but I made sure she lost everything, while I walked away with more than she ever imagined. You won't believe how it all happened. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Daniel, and I come from a broken home. I was raised by a controlling mother and her meddlesome sisters. My eldest sister, Lauren, was 13 years older than me, and Rachel was 10 years older. I was an unplanned child, and when my father left in 1977, never to return, I was blamed for their separation. Throughout my childhood, I endured relentless bullying, both at school and at home. All I ever wanted was a simple sign of love or acceptance from my mother, but it never came. Despite everything, I threw myself into my studies, excelling academically for 12 years. By 1993, I found myself at Kingston University in South London, eager for an escape from my home life. That's where I met Jessica, her image still vivid in my mind. She was confident and beautiful, while I was shy and introverted. She was in her final year studying creative writing, while I was pursuing a master's in mechanical engineering and design. Jessica effortlessly attracted attention from men, and I, too timid to approach her, never imagined I had a chance. To my surprise, one of her friends struck up a conversation with me at a party, and eventually, Jessica joined in. Despite my lack of experience with women, my humility seemed to catch her attention. I finally worked up the courage to ask her out, and to my amazement, she said yes. I'm not ashamed to admit that she took my innocence. But after about 6 months together, I started hearing rumors, whispers about her being involved with other men. Though I couldn't confirm it, I hesitated to confront her. Jessica had been spoiled by her parents and her sister, Hannah, which created tensions in our relationship. I endured her entitled attitude and the public scenes that often embarrassed me, but I was in love, a feeling I had never known before. After graduation, we both found jobs and rented a flat outside Southampton, New Hampshire, where her family ties were strong. Unlike her, I had long since severed ties with my own family. A year later, we got married and welcomed our first daughter, Emily, into the world. A couple of years later, Sophia was born. Jessica flourished as a mother, and for a time, everything seemed perfect. Over the years, my career progressed, and I joined Walker Engineering. The higher salary and bonuses allowed us to save for a better home. But like many families, we struggled when the 2008 economic downturn hit. Job losses and increased competition forced me to work longer hours, often without extra pay. During this time, with both of our daughters in school full-time, I discovered Jessica's affair with a man from our university days. I had been so consumed with work that I failed to see the signs until it was too late. At first, I suspected a former classmate who had recently moved nearby, but when I confronted Jessica, she laughed off my concerns. Though I could sense something was wrong, I had no solid proof. Despite my doubts, I eventually caved to Jessica's constant pushing to buy a bigger house, something she insisted we needed to reflect our status, whatever that meant. We found a beautiful detached home in Southampton. It was a buyer's market at the time, so we managed to get a good deal despite the high mortgage. One decision I made, something unusual for me, was opening a new savings account in my name alone. I deposited my share of the bonuses into it, and since I was the sole breadwinner handling all the finances, I doubt Jessica even noticed, even when I showed her the receipts. Looking back, that turned out to be one of the smartest things I ever did. I wasn't sure what Jessica had planned. If her old flame came back, was she going to leave me? After that incident, things seemed to settle down. I focused on supporting my daughter's education, spending weekends taking them to dance classes, concerts, and the zoo. Jessica, on the other hand, spent most of her time with her indulgent group of friends. I rarely socialized with the other husbands, but we all had a common understanding each of us was controlled by our wives in varying degrees. My friends even joked about it, often playing under my thumb by the Rolling Stones whenever I had to cancel plans for something Jessica wanted. Even at work, my colleagues would comment on my marriage, on how Haley had me wrapped around her finger. But it wasn't until recently, after Sophia left for university, that everything came to a head. For the first time in 18 years, it was just Jessica and me. As I helped Sophia settle into her new apartment, she suddenly turned to me and asked, "Dad, why are you still with Mom?" I was stunned. Sophia, who was usually quiet like me, had never questioned my marriage before. Then she said something that shook me. "I heard she's fooling around with Nathan Walker from your company." Her eyes welled up with tears. It was news to me, but not shocking. Over the years, I could have looked deeper into Jessica's affairs, but I held back. I was afraid of tearing the family apart. I feared my daughters would grow to resent me the way my sisters had resented my father. So, I tolerated her infidelity, convincing myself that preserving our family was more important than my pride. But Sophia's words hit me in more ways than one. First, I realized just how deeply my daughters resented their mother, far more than I had ever imagined. Second, it dredged up painful memories of my own childhood, making me see how those early experiences had shaped my fears and weaknesses. And lastly, I realized that I had become the subject of gossip at work. People were talking about me, about Jessica, about Nathan Walker, the nephew of the company's owner. I felt completely lost. I couldn't keep living like this, especially now that Sophia knew. I knew I had to confront Jessica. That night, my heart pounded as I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for her to come home. When she finally walked in, she barely acknowledged me. Her expression was indifferent, even contemptuous, as she unpacked her bags. I struggled to find the right words, but eventually, I managed to ask about the rumors, about her involvement with someone else. She barely flinched. She dismissed my concerns, saying it wasn't a significant affair. I was stunned. I tried to make sense of her coldness, but before I could say anything, she spoke again. She told me that while I had been a great provider, there were certain emotional needs I simply couldn't fulfill. I asked her, point blank, "So you're cheating on me?" She clarified in the bluntest way possible. Her body was involved, not her heart or mind. Her honesty left me speechless. Then, as if that wasn't enough, she casually mentioned wanting to explore relationships with younger men. I was stunned. When I raised my voice, she gave me a warning. Don't shout. Despite admitting to being involved with 2 other men, she still demanded my silence. She made it clear that if I couldn't accept her terms, she would leave me for someone else. I stayed quiet, hoping my silence would convey my pain. She tried to justify her actions, claiming it was common among her friends and even suggesting that infidelity could strengthen a marriage. I found her reasoning selfish and disgusting, but she insisted that this was just how things were. When I sarcastically suggested that I could see another woman as well, she laughed in my face, mocking the idea that I could ever attract anyone else. Then, without hesitation, she boldly declared that our marriage would continue on her terms and warned me not to ruin it. As much as I hated to admit it, she was right. For 22 years, I had been unwaveringly loyal, submissive, and compliant. Now, everyone knew I was being betrayed, and my reputation at work was in shambles. The next morning, I arrived at work and was immediately confronted by Nathan Walker, the man involved with my wife. He smirked at me and asked how I was doing, his tone dripping with mockery. I swallowed my anger and kept walking, passing by colleagues who chuckled under their breath. Even Hannah, the secretary, seemed amused by my humiliation. At my desk, I tried to focus, but the anger simmered just beneath the surface. That's when I decided to look into my father's past. The only things I knew were that he was born in Cambridgeshire and had left when he was 38 in 1977. I found a few leads and sent out some inquiries, hoping for answers. Later, my boss, Thomas, a man whose morals were as questionable as his leadership, called me into his office. I had considered leaving the company before, given Thomas's behavior, but the high salary kept me tethered to the job. During our conversation, I learned about his affair with Hannah, which he mentioned casually, as if it were just another part of office politics. Then, he brought up the rumors about Jessica. When I confirmed her involvement with Nathan Walker, he just laughed it off. Thomas eventually shifted the conversation to business. He warned me that if my personal problems started affecting the company, I might have to leave. Hannah lingered near the door, clearly listening, eager to collect more gossip to spread around the office. As I walked back to my office, I overheard more laughter. This time, there was no mistaking that it was directed at me. Sitting at my desk, I realized something. I had become irresolute. I had spent years working hard to provide for my family, only to end up funding Jessica's betrayals. I had been content living a simple life, putting my family first, but now I questioned whether I had ever been truly happy. Even my work, the designs I had once taken pride in, felt meaningless now. As I sifted through emails, I was surprised to find a response from Jennifer Holmes of the Cambridge Genealogy Committee. She had answered my inquiry about my father and mentioned a woman named Rachel Murray, who claimed to be my cousin. Excited, I immediately replied, hoping to hear from her soon. That evening, when I arrived home, Jessica greeted me with a smile as if nothing had happened. I kept my distance. After dinner, she asked if we could talk about the night before. I told her there wasn't much to discuss. She had made her stance very clear. She tried pleading with me, acknowledging my strengths as a husband, but she still insisted that I needed to accept her affairs. I looked her in the eye and asked, "How could you betray and humiliate me like this?" But she had no real answer. Instead, she issued an ultimatum: accept her infidelity, or she would leave me for a younger man. Calmly, I brought up Nathan Walker's name, telling her that everyone knew about their affair. She didn't even flinch. She admitted it outright. Then, she revealed that he was essentially my boss and would one day inherit the company. She said he fulfilled her in ways I couldn't and warned that if I didn't comply with her terms, she would leave me for him. I sat there, silent, heartbroken, humiliated, and defeated. Just as I was about to retreat to my study, the phone rang. It was Rachel. We spoke for an hour, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than misery. Rachel was excited that I wanted to explore my father's past. She had so much to share. That's when I learned the truth. My mother hadn't been abandoned by my father. She had forced him out of the house and spent my entire childhood lying to me about it. Tragically, my father had passed away in 1983 from alcohol poisoning when I was just 11 years old. My grandmother had always blamed my mother for his struggles and deteriorating mental health. Rachel told me that after my father left, he had desperately wanted to reconnect with me, but my mother had blocked every attempt he made. We arranged to meet at her home in Cambridge over the weekend, and for the first time in ages, I had something to look forward to. The week dragged on. At home, nothing changed. At work, I continued to be ridiculed. Nathan and his friends found it amusing to tape a pair of underwear to my office door, along with a post-it note that read, "Please return to your wife." I was devastated. I sat at my desk, overwhelmed by humiliation, and wept. I wanted to blame everyone else, but I couldn't. When Saturday finally came, I told Jessica I was visiting a friend in London. She barely reacted, likely indifferent to my absence since it gave her more freedom to do whatever she wanted. The trip to Cambridge was stressful, and I arrived at Rachel's house an hour later than expected. To my surprise, she greeted me with the warmest hug I'd had in years, completely unfazed by my delay. I met her husband, Michael, and their children, Lily and William. Right away, we fell into conversation about my father and the family I never knew I had. Rachel's kindness was evident in everything she did. She and Michael shared stories, often finishing each other's sentences. We spent hours discussing our family history, and when my cousin David and his wife Lucy arrived, the bond between us grew even stronger. After lunch, we took a short trip together, which gave me time to reflect. David and I talked about our lives, and for some reason, I found myself confiding in him and the others. Their support was unwavering. They encouraged me not to tolerate my situation any longer. As I left Cambridge that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a renewed sense of perspective. The lies, the mistreatment, and the betrayals had drained me. But the kindness and honesty of my new family, that gave me hope. I realized I needed to reclaim my happiness, not just for myself, but for my daughters and the people who genuinely cared about me. When I returned home around 8 p.m., I found Jessica getting ready to go out. I asked her where she was going, and she casually responded that she was meeting her friends. Catching her off guard, I mentioned her other companion, Max. Her expression flickered for a moment before she sighed and pleaded with me to stop bringing it up, showing complete indifference to how I felt. I urged her to stop and focus on being my wife. She dismissed me without hesitation, assuring me that she would always be my wife and that she'd be back by midnight. Then, ignoring my pleas, she tried to embrace me. I turned away, unfazed. She simply grabbed her Prada handbag and headed for the door. I stood my ground and firmly told her not to go. She paused, laughing mockingly, and asked, "And what exactly will you do?" She claimed I'd never have the courage to leave her, that I'd always be there, no matter what. Crestfallen, I lowered my head. It was clear, I had been a fool for too long, catering to her selfishness while completely neglecting my own needs. It was time to end the charade and make plans for change. I wasted no time. While she was out, whether with Nathan, Max, or likely both, I began taking action. My mind raced, and I knew I needed to sever any remaining emotional attachment to her. I found a box containing an old family photo, the only one I had of my mother and sisters. Skeptical but determined, I cut out a picture of Jessica's face and pasted it next to them. Maybe, in some odd way, this would help me mentally separate from her once and for all. I placed the altered photo on my desk around 12:45 a.m. and finalized my short-term plans, knowing they would take time to execute. Fortunately, I had time on my side. Jessica wasn't expecting me to leave, but by that point, I had convinced myself to follow through. As I stood there, uncertain but resolute, I heard someone stumbling into the house. Peeking out the window, I watched as Nathan Walker got into his car and drove away. I listened as her footsteps ascended the stairs. Quickly, I cleared my browsing history, resolving to use incognito mode from then on. After she disappeared into the bedroom, I went downstairs to make myself a coffee, reflecting on my next steps. A life away from this place. A life without her. A life without my daughters. The thought of being without them was painful, but relocating closer to them seemed like the best option. The next morning, I went to work with a different mindset. I wasn't going to let things get to me anymore. The usual jokes and laughter directed at me didn't faze me. At noon, I had a bank meeting scheduled. Before that, I carefully reviewed my finances, weighing my options. It was a bit of a risk, but with the right moves, I knew I could come out on top. The meeting went smoothly. I closed my personal savings account and withdrew my share from our joint account, walking out with a substantial sum. Then, I stopped at PC World and bought 2 digital voice recorders, a 500 gigabytes USB 3.0 tough drive, and a new hard drive for my PC. Back at the office, I spent an hour cracking Thomas's password. Ironically, it was just his wife's name and his 6-digit birthday. Once inside, I downloaded all the customer files onto my external drive, including the plans for the energy-efficient hydraulic pump system we had been developing. After deleting all traces from my computer, I swapped out the hard drive, packed up my bag, and reinstalled Windows. The rest of the day was spent researching competitors and browsing job listings in South London. That evening, after a quiet dinner, I retreated to my study and found an intriguing job opportunity. A major competitor, struggling during the financial downturn, was looking for a mechanical engineer. The salary was £10,000 less than what I was currently making, but it was close enough. I submitted my CV, keeping up appearances with Jessica. That night, I chose to sleep in our marital bed, even though the thought of touching her made me sick. Strangely, I took comfort in that feeling. It was another step toward fully distancing myself from her. The next day, I received a call from Robert Williams at Sutton Hydraulics. He was surprised by my interest in leaving Walker Engineering for his smaller firm, but he nearly offered me the job on the spot. I requested an interview for the following day, and he agreed. With the next crucial step in my plan in motion, I used my free time to start looking for apartments near my daughter's. I found a flat just 15 minutes away and scheduled a viewing for after my interview. The following day, I told Thomas that I needed to visit my daughter to sign some papers. Later that evening, I met up with my longtime friends, Toby and Victoria. They knew something was weighing on me. Over tea, I shared my plan to fight back, including the shocking revelations from my cousins about my mother forcing my father out and my sisters siding with her. Toby and Victoria weren't surprised by Jessica's infidelity. What shocked them more was that I was finally fighting back. Victoria, ever the pragmatist, asked me bluntly, "Why now? Why leave Jessica after all this time?" I told them the truth. Visiting my father's grave had been the real turning point. I had seen a carved rose on his headstone, with the words "in loving memory," followed by his birth date and the age he was when he passed. It hit me like a punch to the gut. He had died at the exact same age I was now. And in that moment, I realized I had a choice. I could follow in his footsteps, succumbing to self-pity and drowning my pain in alcohol, or I could fight back. I chose the latter. I was done sacrificing myself for the sake of being the perfect husband, enduring mistreatment, and pretending everything was fine. I confided in my friends about how low I had sunk. Victoria, always thinking ahead, shared some strategic ideas on how to protect myself and get back at Jessica. I appreciated her insight even though, at one point, I had suspected she was having an affair herself. I told them about the separate savings account I had opened in 2008, where I had been quietly depositing my bonuses and extra cash. That money had allowed me to secure a mortgage on my own. I also explained how Toby would help transfer ownership of my house to a new company he would create, using the land registry to handle the deeds. Toby was skeptical at first, but I reassured him Jessica wouldn't have the means to fight it. Her religious parents, once they discovered her infidelity, would choose their principles over supporting her. Toby and Victoria agreed. They even offered to help cover the mortgage, giving me extra time to delay payments. On my way home, I made one last stop at a Land Rover dealership. There, I negotiated to trade in Jessica's car for the latest model. That also meant terminating her payment plan for the Range Rover Sport. The dealership was more than happy to resell it. It was just one more step toward cutting her off completely. I assured the dealer that I'd return soon for my own upgrade, confident he'd recover the cost of Jessica's car by reselling it as nearly new. I apologized for any inconvenience, but pointed out that selling me a brand new Range Rover would more than make up for it. Before leaving, I grabbed a 2016 brochure, not for myself, but for Jessica. When I got home, found her in the living room, sipping coffee, looking pale and worn out. I removed my thermostat and dropped my bag, preparing for the next step of my plan. I told Jessica I loved her and wanted the best for her. Then, I handed her the brochure and pointed at the 2017 model, announcing that I'd be trading in her car for a brand new one. Her face lit up instantly, completely oblivious to my real intentions. She was thrilled and mentioned the only issue was that the dealership had already lined up a buyer for her car. Then, as if it were an afterthought, She suggested we take it in by Friday afternoon and that I could use her car over the weekend if I wanted to visit my lovers. She froze the moment I repeated her words back to her, suddenly looking confused. I prompted her to explain. After a long silence, she admitted there was nothing specific, but she wondered if I was still upset about our arrangement. I corrected her. It's not our arrangement, it's yours. I waited, hoping for some kind of remorse, but she simply nodded, as if she had already accepted it. Then, with an almost genuine look of concern, she told me she loved me. I said nothing and walked into the kitchen. Just then, my phone rang. I stepped out into the back garden to take the call. It was Toby, confirming that the money had been transferred and everything was set for the next day. Without delay, I walked into the bank and met with a mortgage specialist. An hour later, my mortgage was paid off, and all my accounts were closed. I opened a new account at another bank, making sure Jessica would never know unless she decided to take legal action. Later that day, I contacted the land registry and completed the necessary online forms for Toby and Victoria's new company. Within 10 minutes, I received an email confirming that the application would be processed in 3 to 5 days. Once completed, I could hand over the deeds to Toby, who would register the property under his company's name. That evening, I knocked on Thomas's office door. As expected, Hannah was with him. I might have interrupted something, but she quickly left. I handed Thomas an envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "My resignation," I replied. "I figured it's best if I leave immediately, given everything going on between our families." He looked stunned. I told him I'd return on Monday to collect my things and that he shouldn't tell anyone. Then, as casually as I could, I dropped a pen. As I bent down to pick it up, I discreetly placed a digital recorder beneath the wooden frame of his chair. Before leaving, I smirked at him. "Don't come crawling back when you're broke," I said. "Because the only thing keeping your wife with you is your money." I could tell I had struck a nerve. Later that day, I dropped off Jessica's car at the dealership. John Reeves, one of the employees, kindly offered me a ride home. That night, when I walked in, Jessica was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and swollen. I asked what was wrong. Reluctantly, she admitted that she had contracted gonorrhea. I laughed. She glared at me furious. I told her to take her medication and move on. The tension in the room was thick, but for the first time in months, I slept soundly that night. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed. I had slept in the spare room and had no regrets. Later, I walked into our bedroom and gently woke Jessica, telling her I was giving her space to rest. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I know I messed up," she whispered. "I love you, and I want us to be okay." For a brief moment, I felt a twinge of sympathy, but it faded as quickly as it came. I realized, in that moment, I had nothing left for her. Without a word, I left the room, got in my car, and drove off. I felt content. That evening, I stayed at Toby and Victoria's house for a small dinner party. I returned home late Sunday morning. Jessica was up, cleaning. The moment she saw me, she rushed over and hugged me tightly. I patted her back, nothing more. Casually, I suggested we finalize the car arrangements. I even offered to drop her off in town, where her sister could pick her up and take her to the dealership. I imagined her driving back in her new Range Rover, smiling as she approached me with open arms. But I wouldn't be there. Throughout the day, Jessica was overly affectionate, which made me uncomfortable. She kept trying to kiss or hug me, but I found excuses to leave every time. By bedtime, I noticed her eyes were red again. Wishing her good night, she asked if I would sleep beside her. She wanted to cuddle. She needed reassurance. Feeling nothing, I responded, "Not until you get the all-clear from your doctor." Her face twisted in anger. I firmly reminded her that she had made her bed. Bitterly, she snapped back, "Once I'm better, I'll have no trouble finding a man who wants me in bed." I chuckled to myself. Finally, it had taken longer than I expected, but there it was, the real Jessica. Any lingering regrets vanished, replaced by 21 years of resentment. In the past, I might have fallen for her manipulations. Not this time. I ignored her tears and walked into the spare room. It was my last night in the house, and I was at peace. Her cruel words had erased any remaining doubts. I looked at the altered photo of her next to my sister's, and all I felt was hatred. She had always been sweet when she wanted something and nasty when she didn't. The next morning, I woke up early and went about my day. Jessica had a hair appointment, so I drove her into town, knowing full well it might be the last time I ever saw her. I hoped it would be, but I wasn't certain. On the way, I called our mobile provider and canceled both of our contracts, paying the termination fee with my card. I made sure the phones would stay active until 5 p.m. Then, I headed to the office to collect my P45. The atmosphere was different, quieter than usual. Word of my resignation had spread. As I walked down the hallway toward my office, I passed the usual group by the coffee machine. Max and Nathan were there, cracking jokes, completely oblivious to the fact that both of them had been involved with my wife. I greeted them with false cheer. When they asked about Jessica, I gave a dry response. She's not doing well, I said. Thanks to one of you giving her an unwelcome surprise. Silence. Their jaws dropped. I kept walking. When I reached Hannah's desk, she gave me a half-smile. And for the first time, I felt like I had finally earned some respect. Maybe the respect I thought I had earned was just in my imagination. Thomas appeared at the door just as I was about to knock. Without hesitation, he told me he had what I wanted. I stepped inside, sat down in his office, and discreetly slipped a recorder into my pocket. I already knew about his usual Friday meetings with Hannah, and now I had it recorded. Thomas leaned back in his chair. Got another job lined up? I ignored him at first, then finally replied, no. He smirked, probably assuming I'd come crawling back soon enough. I asked about my final month's pay and bonus. Thomas burst into laughter. Right then, Hannah walked in with my P45. She glanced at Thomas and asked what was so funny. Daniel here thinks he's getting a bonus, Thomas chuckled. Hannah let out a laugh and joined in. That's when I started laughing too. They both froze. Hannah frowned. Why are you laughing? I smirked. I was just wondering why you let the old man take advantage of you every week. Her face turned pale. Thomas's expression darkened, his smirk fading into rage. He spat out a string of insults, telling me to get out before he had the boys throw me out. I grabbed my things and left, still laughing. By the time I got home, I had one last task to complete before leaving the house for good. I unloaded the back seats of the car and began surveying the place, gathering what I wanted to take: paintings, family photos, jewelry, and personal belongings. Jessica's wardrobe, which I had paid for over the years, was mine. I took it all. I collected important papers, the girls' birth certificates, my wedding certificate, my degree, and some old mementos from the loft. Then I realized I needed a TV. So, I took that too, along with my movie collection. The car was packed full, but I left behind anything that wasn't worth taking, including Jessica's clothes. Before stepping out, I grabbed the best pictures of me and the girls and packed them up, making sure to leave nothing behind that mattered. I wasn't in a rush. Jessica wouldn't be home until after 2 p.m. I took a break, made myself a cup of tea, and canceled our satellite, phone, and internet services. I also contacted the utility companies. It would take a few days to process, but I wasn't concerned. Back in the bedroom, I noticed something that gave me an idea. A dark one. At the top of the wardrobe, inside a dusty old box, was Jessica's precious wedding dress. She had loved it more than anything. I pulled it down along with our wedding album. I grabbed a duvet cover, stuffed everything inside, and carried it outside. Into the pile, I threw Jessica's clothes, but not her underwear. I didn't want any reminders. I closed the car and checked the time. 1:45 p.m. I called Robert Williams to confirm I'd drop off my P45 later. I was eager to start fresh. Then, I found some paint thinner in the garage. At exactly 2 p.m., as I stood in the garden soaking the wedding dress, my phone rang. It was Jessica. Her voice was sharp. What the hell is going on? I smirked. What do you mean? She grew frustrated. Stop playing dumb. What have you done? I remained calm. Care to be more specific? There was a pause. I could hear her heavy breathing, and Jennifer's voice in the background. Then Jessica snapped. I just found out you didn't get me the new car. You sold mine. I let the silence stretch. Then, teasingly, oh, yeah, I might have forgotten to mention that. Panic crept into her voice. What the hell is happening, Daniel? Though my heart raced, I kept my voice steady. From now on, if you want a car, you can pay for it yourself. She yelled in frustration, but I remained calm. You heard me just fine, I said, then added, I need to clean the kitchen. Is this some kind of twisted joke? She demanded. I didn't answer. I simply ended the call and stepped outside. Then I struck the match. The flames rose, consuming the wedding dress, the album, and everything else in the pile. As I walked back inside, I pulled our marriage certificate from my pocket, ripped it into pieces, and left it on the kitchen table. Beside it, I placed a photo of us at Disneyland, a reminder of better days. I wondered if she'd remember those moments fondly. Getting into my car, I drove off. At the end of the street, I glanced back. Jessica and Jennifer were rushing inside, too distracted to even look up. I turned off my phone, smiled to myself, and kept driving. By 4 p.m., I was in Sutton with time to spare. I visited a phone shop, set up a new mobile contract, then stopped by the office to drop off my P45. That's when I met Charlotte, my new secretary. Unlike Hannah, she was professional despite her youth. At my empty flat, I made a cup of tea with the kettle I had borrowed from home and ordered pizza for dinner. Checking my old phone, I saw it had been disconnected. A smirk crossed my face. I imagined Jessica's frustration as she realized she had no phone either. With no furniture yet, I laid out a sleeping bag in the lounge and waited for my food. Then, I powered up my laptop. The recordings from Thomas Walker's office played through my speakers, confirming what I already knew, his affair with Hannah. I copied them onto USB drives and prepared 2 envelopes. One addressed to Thomas's wife, Eleanor, the other to Hannah's boyfriend, Peter. I planned to mail them first thing in the morning. That night, I called my daughter, Emily, to update her on everything. I warned her not to tell her mother where I was. Oddly, Jessica hadn't even tried to contact me, and for the first time in years, I felt true relief. Over the next week, I furnished my flat and slowly diverted business away from Walker Engineering, steering clients towards Sutton. Thomas caught on quickly, but I didn't care. Word soon reached me that Jessica had moved back in with her parents. Her infidelity had not been well received. She was furious with me, and somehow, that only made me feel more satisfied. By the weekend, Toby and Victoria hosted another dinner party, a welcome distraction from my plans. Then, on Sunday, I received promising news. After only a week on the market, my house had 2 serious offers. I accepted one immediately. I ensured the sale went smoothly, securing my daughter's future, compensating Toby, and setting aside some cash for myself. As the week progressed, Toby informed me that the sale was moving faster than expected. Meanwhile, my daughters had reached out to their mother. Her response? More anger. More threats. She assured them the turmoil would be over soon. I reassured them that they would be fine. As for me, I was just getting started. On Tuesday morning, during a conversation with a new client who had recently met with Thomas to discuss a contract renewal, I learned about Walker Engineering's dire situation. The client revealed that due to a loss of projects, the company had to lay off half its staff. I also heard that Mrs. Walker had decided to divorce Thomas over his affair. Despite this revelation, I felt no sympathy. My mind was focused on commission checks in the future. While I was unaware of Hannah and her boyfriend's fates, I knew he had received my gift. And while I wasn't sure if Mrs. Walker had received hers, the reasons behind their upcoming divorce were all too clear. I couldn't help but wonder what Mrs. Walker's friends and family would think of her affair with an older man. As a reward, I was gifted a brand new Land Rover Discovery HSE, though I had already considered treating myself to something nice. Robert and the executives were so impressed with my performance and the company's progress that they decided to present me with the car, along with a substantial commission of over £30,000. As I admired the car from my office window, I was taken by surprise when a familiar Ford Focus pulled into the parking lot. It belonged to Jessica. My office phone rang and Charlotte, my secretary, informed me that a woman claiming to be my wife was waiting in reception. I told her to inform the woman that I was in a meeting and would be downstairs in an hour. 3 hours later, I looked out the window again. Jessica was still waiting. Sighing, I decided to leave for the night, prepared to either face her or simply drive away without her noticing. As I approached my car, I heard the screech of tires. Before I knew it, Jessica had blocked me in with her car. She stormed toward me, her disheveled appearance revealing her distress. She wore worn-out clothes that seemed to belong to her sister, and her hair was a tangled mess. "You damn idiot," she screamed, attempting to slap me but missing. Fueled by rage, she demanded retribution. I tried to calm her down, inviting her to sit in the car with me. She hesitated but eventually slid into the passenger seat. Her expression shifted when she noticed the new car. "Where the hell did this come from?" she muttered, clearly thrown off by the sight. Then, she broke down. She started pleading, talking about her financial struggles, about how hard life had become without me. I listened in silence. Then, I reminded her that since I couldn't fulfill her needs and didn't measure up to her younger lovers, I felt redundant in her life. She grabbed my arm, eyes desperate. "Please, just come home," she begged. "We can move past everything. I forgive you." I scoffed. "You forgive me?" She nodded earnestly. "For everything. For wrecking my stuff. For ruining my life." I shook my head in disbelief. "You forgive me?" I repeated. "What about the cheating? The disrespect? The way you treated me?" She didn't answer. I told her, in no uncertain terms, that I would never be with her again and coldly suggested she go be with one of her lovers. She swallowed hard. "They're not the same," she whispered. She then admitted that since our separation, her friends had begun treating her differently. The women she once gossiped with were keeping their distance. Their husbands, suddenly uneasy, had started questioning their wives' fidelity. While I acknowledged that I played a role in her downfall, I felt no satisfaction in it. I just wanted to move on. She pleaded with me again, saying she had nothing left. Then, she brought up the house. "Where's my share?" she demanded. "And the divorce? We need to sort that out." I stared at her. You never once told me you loved me, Jessica. I said. You just needed me. But I don't need you. She fell silent. Then, I delivered the final blow. I told her I had defaulted on the mortgage and lost the house. She froze. You, what? I lied, I admitted, watching the shock spread across her face. I knew the real reason she had come. She wasn't here for me. She was here for money. I told her I wanted a divorce. She gasped. Daniel, please. I love you. We've been together for over 20 years. I made a mistake. I shook my head. No, Jessica. You made a huge mistake. One that I will never forgive. She screamed. Then she broke down, filling the car with her sobs. I sighed. Let's make this simple, I said. Take 30,000 pounds in cash and walk away. No legal battles. No drama. Just sign the divorce papers, and we're done. The tears stopped instantly. Her demeanor changed. Her expression hardened. You're bribing me? She spat. Then she laughed bitterly. No. I want more. I'll fight you in court for everything. I exhaled sharply. You can try, I said calmly. But by the time your lawyer finds anything, the legal bills will wipe out whatever you gain. Her eyes narrowed. You wouldn't, she said. I met her gaze without flinching. Take the money, Jessica, or go to war with me. Your choice. She clenched her jaw. You mistreated me. I scoffed. No. Thanks to you, our daughters will thrive. You are the one who lost everything. A tense silence stretched between us. Then, she exhaled sharply. Fine. She agreed to take the money and go ahead with the divorce. I told her I would arrange everything. She slammed the car door shut and sped away from the parking lot. The next day, I filed for divorce, citing infidelity. A week later, I arranged to meet Jessica at the girl's apartment. Though the house sale was complete, I held off on any major investments until the papers were signed. It was difficult maintaining civility in front of Emily and Sophia, but I handed Jessica the cash. She signed the papers. As I bid the girls farewell, wishing Jessica luck, I turned to leave. Then, suddenly, Jessica burst into tears. I suspected the tears weren't for me, but for them. Emily and Sophia exchanged knowing glances. Sophia smiled at me. See you next weekend at the Coldplay concert? I hesitated for a moment. I went back into the room, where Jessica was still sobbing, unnoticed by the others. Then, it dawned on me. Sophia had mentioned the concert. Emily asked about our plans, and I responded that I'd check with Annie and let them know during the week. As I turned to leave, Jessica's voice cut through the air. She was shouting after me. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I stepped out the door and closed it behind me, leaving it all behind. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you soon.